Imagine living in a country that called itself a democracy, but every election, every president, every law was decided without your voice. Nearly half the population watched from the sidelines. Not because they didn't care, not because they didn't understand politics, but because the law said their opinion didn't count. And for generations, most Americans believed that was completely normal. For much of American history, voting wasn't simply a right. It was a privilege reserved for a very specific group: adult men. Women paid taxes, obeyed laws, raised families, worked farms, ran businesses. Yet when election day arrived, they had no ballot, no representation, no legal voice over the people making decisions that shaped their lives. Marriage made things even more unequal. In many states, married women couldn't own property independently, couldn't sign contracts without restrictions, often had limited legal control over wages they earned. The law treated husbands as the public representatives of the household. Politics was considered a man's responsibility. Women were expected to influence society quietly, inside the home, not inside government. Many people, including women themselves, accepted this. Because it was the world they had always known. Churches reinforced it, schools taught it, newspapers defended it. Questioning the system wasn't simply unpopular. It was considered dangerous. Because if women voted, people feared everything else might change too. Family roles, business, religion, power itself. But eventually, someone asked a simple question. If government rules everyone, why should only half the population choose it? And that question would become impossible to silence. The first organized challenge came in 1848, a meeting unlike anything America had seen before, the Seneca Falls Convention. Around 300 people gathered in New York. Women, men, reformers. They published a bold document, the Declaration of Sentiments. It declared something radical. Women deserved equal rights, including the right to vote. Many newspapers mocked the idea. Some laughed openly. Others called it absurd. But the conversation had started. Then came new leaders: Susan B., Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone. Women who spent decades traveling across America, giving speeches, writing newspapers, organizing petitions, holding conventions, often speaking to hostile crowds, sometimes being shouted down before they could finish a sentence. Susan B. Anthony even attempted to vote in the presidential election of 1872. She was arrested, found guilty, and fined $100. She refused to pay. The government never forced her to, because collecting the fine would have allowed her to appeal the case. Instead, her conviction stood. Years passed, then decades. States in the American West slowly began allowing women to vote. Wyoming Territory led the way in 1869. Colorado followed, then Utah, then Idaho. Bit by bit, the map began to change. But nationally, nothing moved. Congress repeatedly rejected constitutional amendments. It seemed like the movement had reached a wall. Then, a new generation arrived, and they were willing to go much further. One of those new leaders was Alice Paul. She believed polite requests were no longer enough. Inspired by British suffragettes, she organized massive marches, public demonstrations, and something almost unthinkable: protests outside the White House. Beginning in 1917, women stood silently, holding banners demanding democracy. Even while America was fighting World War I, many politicians called them unpatriotic. Crowds attacked the protesters. Police arrested them. Some were sent to the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia. Conditions were brutal. Reports described beatings, unsanitary cells, prison guards using violence against peaceful demonstrators. Several women began hunger strikes. Authorities responded by force-feeding them through tubes pushed into their noses and throats. The public reaction changed everything. Newspapers began covering the treatment. Sympathy grew. The movement suddenly looked less like a fringe protest and more like a fight for basic rights. Meanwhile, the war itself changed American society. Millions of women worked in factories, hospitals, government offices. They proved they could support the country far beyond traditional expectations. The old argument that women weren't suited for political responsibility started collapsing. Pressure mounted. Congress reconsidered. The president eventually endorsed a constitutional amendment supporting women's voting rights. But one final obstacle remained: the states. And one vote would decide everything. A constitutional amendment required approval from 3/4 of the states. 35 had already agreed. One more was needed. The deciding battle happened in Tennessee. The legislature was deeply divided. The vote looked destined to fail, until a young legislator named Harry Byrne changed his mind. Inside his pocket was a letter from his mother. She urged him to support the amendment. When the roll was called, he voted yes. The amendment passed Tennessee by a single vote. On August 18th, 1920, ratification was complete. Days later, the 19th Amendment officially became part of the Constitution. Its promise was simple. The right to vote could not be denied because of sex. After more than 70 years of organized campaigning, millions of American women finally gained constitutional voting rights. A victory generations had fought to achieve. But the story wasn't actually over. Not even close. The amendment changed the Constitution. But it didn't erase every barrier. Across much of the South, many black women still faced poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, violence, the same obstacles preventing many black men from voting. Native American women encountered another problem. Many weren't even recognized as U.S. citizens until 1924. Some Asian American women also remained excluded because citizenship laws restricted naturalization. For millions, the right existed on paper, but not at the ballot box. It would take decades, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, before many of those barriers were finally challenged at the federal level. Which means the famous victory of 1920 wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning of another struggle. Because history rarely changes in one dramatic moment. Sometimes, the hardest battle begins after the celebration is over.